On November 30th, 2012, going until December 2nd, 2012, Ottawa, Ontario will be having a great conference hosted by CFI Ottawa and CFI Canada called Eschaton 2012. For those of you who don't know, because I didn't at first, Eschaton comes from the word eschatology, which deals with the end of the world. So basically, it's almost as if we'd call the conference Apocalypse 2012. I'll be speaking at the conference. I'll be talking about gender issues. But beyond that, I'm also helping to promote it. And one of the interesting questions that's come up in dealing with the conference and also in promoting the name of Eschaton 2012 is, why are people so obsessed with the end of the world? Why do apocalypse myths seem to be one of the most prolific ones that come in our culture? Why are we as a species just so obsessed with the end of times? And ultimately it comes down to the unknown, and the fact that the fear of the unknown is one of the most common fears in human society. Nothing is more unknown than death, and so these concepts are more feared. No one can say for sure when the world is going to end. I mean, yes, everything has a beginning of sorts, and so ultimately everything will have an end of sorts. Human beings will not always exist. We will eventually most likely go extinct. Whether it'll happen at the same time as the rest of the planet, we don't know. A lot of it depends on basically what the world is going to be like in 10, 20, 30, 100, 10,000 million years. That being said, apocalypse narratives give human beings an illusion of control. If we can identify how the world is going to end, then maybe we can do something to avoid it. And if you look at a lot of the most popular apocalypse narratives, an interesting pattern that emerges is that almost all of them have some kind of trend towards things that you can do in order to avoid terrifying consequences, or steps that you can take to avoid terrifying consequences. If you look at Y2K, well, if you built a bomb shelter and you collected a bunch of canned goods and, you made sure that they were underground, well, then you wouldn't have to worry about all of the airplanes falling out of the sky and destroying you. With camping's rapture scenarios, well, if you follow the Ten Commandments and you really, really believe in God, well, then maybe you won't then you won't get left behind and have to deal with the horrible war between good and evil. On an unrelated note, Family Guy has a hilarious rapture episode, not Family Guy, American Dad has a hilarious rapture episode that I highly recommend. But going further from that, this fear of the unknown is the same impulse that leads to other dangerous beliefs such as homeopathy and religion. I mean, already in looking at apocalypse narratives, we see very much how they can have a very dangerous impact on society. I mean, we all know the stories of people who, when they got convinced by camping that the rapture was coming, spent all of their money in order to advertise this fact, or gave all their money away to charity, and then when the end of the world didn't come, well, whoops, sorry, you're broke. Whoops, sorry, you can't feed your family anymore. Whoops, sorry, whatever. When mass cults, usually do end of the world scenarios, you get mass suicides, which can be horrifying. And even with stuff that's less obviously dangerous, such as, for example, long-term end of world scenarios, like, for example, the multiple religions that exist. I mean, they still have a certain terrifying precedent to them, which is basically the potential for mass hysteria. And the same impulse towards trying to control how the world is going to end, we see very much in our day-to-day lives as well. The fear of the unknown leads to such dangerous beliefs such as homeopathy and religion. So let's look at religion first. Religion is an attempt to make the unknown, basically what happens after we die, known by setting forth a series of consequences and rewards associated with certain actions. So, if you're Christian, well, follow these 10 rules and you'll go to heaven. If you don't, you'll go to hell, and this is what heaven's like and this is what hell's like. If you're Hindu, or a lot of the other rebirth reincarnation religions. If you live your life along these certain principles, well, then you'll be reincarnated as something better, with the ultimate reward being that you don't have to continue into the cycle of rebirth, and you can, experience ecstasy and joy and unity with your deity. A lot of different religions have a lot of various different scenarios, but ultimately they all come down to the same thing, telling you what happens when you die, taking away that unknown which so terrifies us. So religious people operate under the illusion that they know what is going to happen after you die, and so they think they no longer fear death. Instead, though, the fear of the unknown is actually increased. No believer is ever entirely sure of what is going to happen when they die. I mean, no matter how much they say, oh yes, I truly believe, I know this is exactly what's going to happen, I'm going to go to heaven, I'm going to go to hell, every believer has their doubts. Every believer thinks to themselves, well, was I really good? What about those times that I didn't exactly follow the 10 rules, or I didn't exactly adhere to these principles that are saying, what happens if I actually go to hell? And so they, there's inconsistencies in their narratives too, that strike at internal fears that they got the actions and the rewards wrong. What if God really does care that you jerked off in middle school? What if God really does love gay people and finds your hate repulsive? Or, what if God really wanted you to dance around on one foot singing nursery rhymes, and now instead of just having your life end, you are going to suffer eternally? I mean, the answers given by religion aren't real answers, and so they ultimately lead to greater questions. But they're not the right kind of questions. The process of belief is in and of itself dangerous as well, because, we'll get to that in a second. The fear makes them irrationally defensive about their beliefs and leads to fundamentalism. The idea being, well, if I can prove to everybody else that I really, 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 really believe, then I can prove to myself and I can stop being so afraid. I mean, ultimately, where you get a lot of the religious fundamentalists is really fear. It all comes down to that. It all comes down to this unrelenting, unending fear. And they just can't face it. And so they try to convince everyone else that they're not so afraid in the hopes that they'll eventually convince themselves. Unfortunately, in their quest to desperately convince everybody else, they won't stop and they won't listen to reason. So when you come to them and you say, well, actually, we have evidence that suggests this, well, they can't face it, because if they have to face that, then they have to face the fact that they just don't know, and they have to face their fear, and a lot of people just can't do that. The process of belief is in and of itself dangerous as well. When people mask their fears with false beliefs, they stop asking the questions necessary to expand knowledge. Their fear makes them hold on to false beliefs, even in light of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, because in doing so, they would have to face their fears, like I said. If one stops to think about it, the only real solution to the fear of the unknown is discovery. We no longer fear thunder and lightning like they did before, because we know it's not random. We know there's a certain process that happens to it. We know what causes storms. I mean, it's not that you didn't sacrifice your virgin daughter on the altar of Zeus. It's the fact that, the negative and positive, or, the negative ions and the positive charges collide. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact science involved in lightning, but it would take about a few seconds on Wikipedia to look that up and figure it out. So, we no longer worship Zeus. We no longer worship Thor, because we have the answers. Rather than trying to fill the void left behind, left by the unknown with false ideas, we should face it. We should stare into the void and, face it with the weapons of how and why, which are actually the two most powerful questions that we have. I mean, if you stop and think about it, why is such an incredible question. The question why leads to the most fulfilling answers. In doing so, in facing the void and facing them with the questions of how and why, you build a foundation of truth, which ultimately not only just lifts you up out of the void of ignorance and fear, but raises you up. You stop having this unknown. I mean, ultimately, you can never answer all the questions simply because every answer leads to more questions. That's the brilliant thing about science, is the fact that every answer brings more questions with it, and it's fantastic because curiosity and discovery and that process is one of the most fulfilling and exciting things you could ever do. You know, even if you're not coming at it from a science perspective, I mean, what's art, what's literature, other than answering those supposedly unanswerable questions? You don't need religion for it. I mean, there's so many other ways to find much better answers that actually rely on truth. Religion's not even very good at it, like Alex here states. You know, I mean, if you look at it, a lot of religions, they get things just so fundamentally wrong, and which is why you often get, you know, you get these fundamentalists down in the U.S. and to some extent here in Canada and in other places in the world as well, you know, stopping and saying, no, 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 not evolution, because if we're wrong about how the Earth was created, then oh shit, maybe we're wrong about everything else too. And that's not something they're prepared to face. The fun thing about Eschaton 2012 is it'll use the convenient starting point of the apocalypse narratives to examine the dangers of these false beliefs and discuss how and why they emerge and how and why they must be struck down. So, I mean, coming off of the fear of the unknown, you know, and other dangerous beliefs that we get from that. I mean, homeopathy. What is homeopathy? You know, then trying to control something that we can't necessarily control, which is basically the effect of disease and various things on our body and potentially on our lives. I mean, disease can be terrifying for people who've never been sick before. You can't understand the desperation that comes from just not knowing what's wrong. I've been there. I will get around to telling you guys my medical fear story, but I mean, I have Crohn's disease, I have severe arthritis, and I've been through extreme pain and extreme suffering in my life, and I know just how desperate you are to find answers, and when the people who are supposed to be experts don't have those answers for you, you are tempted to look in other places for them. You're tempted to look in other places for answers. When I was going through my process of discovery and diagnosis, I know I had a lot of people come up to me with a lot of really dumb suggestions. I remember having a faith healer come to my mother's office, which unfortunately meant we couldn't laugh in his face, you know, and try to heal me by putting his hand on my crotch and, you know, praying really, really hard while shaking his hand a little bit. You know, and I mean, what are you supposed to say to this old man, you know, who's trying to cop a feel, you know, under the guise of belief, you know, other than laugh in his face, but you can't because you're at work and he's a client, and if you do, well, he might get insulted, but, you know, at the same time, you're standing there going, really? But that's what faith does. It, you know, creates these extremely dumb situations because people just aren't willing to stop and face their fear. You know, not a lot of people have faced their eventual mortality. Not a lot of people can look at death and think to themselves, when death comes, I stop. That can be a scary thought, but it doesn't have to be. If you live your life to the fullest, well then, stopping is just stopping. You won't know. You won't feel scared. You won't feel anything. You'll just stop. It's not so bad. Anyway, I hope a lot of you will come out to Eschaton 2012. We're going to have some awesome people who are going to be speaking. P.Z. Myers, which I'm really excited about because I really want to see him speak. Same with Ophelia Benson and Ian Cromwell and Natalie Reid. I think you can tell I'm a bit of a Free Thought Blogs fan. We're also going to have Chris DiCarlo, who I got the chance to see speak in Montreal, so I'm looking forward to his talk again. It'll be on a different subject this time, so it'll be a lot of fun too. Larry Moran, Eugenie Scott, which I'm sure she's going to have some really amazing things to talk about. So I hope I see all of you guys there, and if you guys have any other observations on why we find apocalypse scenarios so enthralling, please leave them for me in the comments. I love comments. Yeah, so that's why I think people find them so enthralling, and that's why I think they're so dangerous. Have a great day. Peace.